So welcome everyone, a very good morning, good afternoon everybody. It's great to see so many of you able to join us today. And before we start, can I just do the usual housekeeping? For those who haven't joined a session with us before, you will have noticed we have put you all on mute. And we do encourage you all to use your chat boxes at the bottom of your screens for any questions. The webinar will be recorded and forwarded to you all afterwards. And like all our webinars, it is available on the IAC YouTube channel and the IAC webinar and demand page on our website. Now can I just draw your attention before we start to our next webinar, which is on the 24th of June, which is a session we have with Master Connection Associates. And that's looking at how to inspire more meetings using your IAC resources. And also just a note for you all that we have a couple of new sessions coming online next week. So do keep an eye open on that lineup and get yourselves registered for some of those sessions. Now, before we start, I'd like to hand over to IAC CEO Mark Cooper, who's going to introduce you to our presenter today. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Kate, and welcome everybody. I know that we'll have a few that are coming in off their last Zoom call over the course of the next few minutes, because that's the way it works. But it's a great pleasure to bring the IAC community back together again for another IAC Institute webinar. And today you are in for a real treat. This is the first time that we've had the absolute pleasure to welcome Butlers and Hospitality as an institution to the IAC webinar program. So I have the absolute pleasure of introducing a gentleman called Vincent Vermeulen, who is MD of Butlers and Hospitality in Belgium. And Vincent is the founder and director of the Butlers School. He's already the fourth generation in his family that's dedicated to work in a life of hospitality, service, and this sector. And we all know that at the heart of everything we do related to business events is creating hospitable environments. So really interested to get the experience and the depth of four generations of that from Vincent. His family experience in this field is simply unrivaled. His relationship with the world's greatest luxury establishments also means that the school can open its doors that remain closed to others. And we welcome some of Vincent's current students from all around Europe and the US to today's webinar as well. So I hope they'll get involved and share their insights. He's worked in various Michelin star restaurants, trained and worked as a butler in the wonderful London, just an hour away from where I'm sat at this very moment. And he's led hospitality and service departments in a number of multinational organizations and brands that you will all be familiar with. And he is a certified wedding planner by the Association of Bridal Consultants. And I have to be careful on this next bit. He's organized over 1,000 weddings. He hasn't been to over 1,000 weddings and been stood at the altar at 1,000 weddings, needless to say. But he has a very deep career in the hospitality, the wedding and the hotel sector. Next to that, Vincent is also a fellow of the Guild of International Professional Toastmasters. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, sit back. I welcome Vincent Vermeulen, MD of Butlers and Hospitality. Enjoy.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very, very excited to share a number of tips today about hospitality. Thank you also to the people of IAC for inviting me. And in the next 45 to 60 minutes, I really want to share my knowledge, which I actually gained over the last few years. So let's get it done. Right. So you already saw the movie just very slightly because that saves me a bit of time. However, allow me to introduce myself just very shortly in terms of my experience. It actually started a long time ago. It started with my great grandfather in 1884, who was actually already a butler. And it went from there. I actually grew up in a family of hospitality people. And the thing was that my grandparents actually started a small pension at the Belgian coast. And then actually my parents took over the business, and I actually that's where I grew up. That's where I grew up. So I had the bug, if you know what I mean. And on top of that, I started working in Michelin star restaurants. I became a sommelier, and ever since it's been in my life. But you know, I built a company. I built the hospitality company of my parents. I took it over, and we changed the restaurant and the hotel into something much bigger, which they call a catering group. We had a number of banquet halls, and we organized a lot of weddings, and we did catering, etc., etc. But the company actually got too big for me, and because I'm a person who likes to give personalized service to people. And so what we did was we actually sold the better part of the company, and I went to the UK, and I became a butler. That's what I did. I became a butler, and I started working in London in the Lanesborough Hotel, for the people who know London a bit. And I'll be sharing a few of the secrets I learned there as well today, which is relevant to any business industry. So I became a butler, and first worked at the hotel. Then I was actually asked by a couple of people to be a private butler. So I did that for a number of years. But I always had the dream of starting my own butler school. And that's actually what I did in 2013. I started my school very small in a 5-star hotel with a 4-week training. And by now, we actually came home to where we are at the moment. You saw it at the end of the video. That's where I'm at the moment. And we don't do a 4-week training, but we do an 8-week training, which is one of the longest butler trainings you can find in the world. And it's actually the only one who's residential. So that means that the students actually live here, work here, study here, just like they would in a real residence. And we actually have some of our students joining the webinar, which is absolutely amazing, the ones on the current training, and maybe they'll share something in the chat box later on. So that's absolutely amazing. On top of that, so we train butlers, and on top of that, we actually have a side of the business that places butlers. So we do also recruitment. You can see, for example, here a gentleman that trained with us. I think it was back in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. And he went on to work for the French president, where he, of course, had the privilege to welcome a number of special people, and let's say a number of very special people, if you know what I mean. So we train butlers, we place butlers in families. And speaking of our clients, we also train at their homes. So we go to the homes of the families to train their existing staff, not only butlers, but also in terms of housekeeping and what have you. And their homes can be quite different than to what you might think. For example, this was one of the homes, if you know what I mean, which we trained back in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, and that leads me into the topic of today, we also go around the world training anything which is hospitality resorts, but also any possible enterprise, company, organization that could profit from customer experience, even a bit of etiquette, and of course, hospitality. And that's why I'm here today. Because it all started with one CEO asking me, would you care to do a keynote for about 50 other CEOs? And I asked him the question, what do butlers have to do with CEOs? And to my own surprise, the mindset of butlers are very much the same as to the business industry. And that's what I'm going to try to show to you today. So today I am going to show you 3 powerful techniques which you can benefit from. In fact, any company can benefit from. So I want to talk about customer experience, and I want to give you concrete tips and techniques which you can implement even today, even tomorrow, which will make a difference. Absolutely, that's my guarantee and my promise to you today. But before I do that, just to kind of show you where those tips are, we first have to see how they fit in and why we actually need customer experience. Why is it interesting to think about investing in customer experience? Well, one of the reasons is you don't want to miss out in 2021. You want to stay ahead of the pack, if you know what I mean. Because what we have seen is that customer experience is absolutely the single thing that will make the difference in any product or service. I mean, I know that's a big statement, but let me show you. We did a survey, and this survey shows that in the next 5 years, almost half of every company decides to invest in customer experience over product development and over price strategy. Now, what are the advantages of investing in customer experience? Well, there's a number. There are 3 of them. First of all, it can make you swim in a blue ocean. Now, what does that mean? Maybe some of you know the Blue Ocean Strategy book. It's a well-known book in business literature, and it's all about creating and capturing certain market spaces. However, these market spaces are already there. An example I can give from our school was, there were, of course, a number of other butler schools before I started. And I looked at the Blue Ocean Strategy, and I said, if or when a butler student goes to a butler school, they only have one option, whether it's this a 4-week training or an 8-week training or whatever. So our Blue Ocean Strategy was choice. There wasn't one butler school around the world that gave you the choice to do a short-term or a long-term training. And that's what we did. And it kind of went well. That didn't mean that there weren't other butler schools, but they didn't swim in the ocean of choice, if you know what I mean. Another example could be, for example, the Chrysler brand. In 1984, Chrysler released the minivan. Of course, there were a lot of cars, but the minivan wasn't really a thing. That was their Blue Ocean Strategy. And another example, of course, is, for example, Cirque du Soleil, where they had circuses for hundreds of years, but they did it in a different way. And this is also true for traditional industries. If you look, for example, at the retail industry, I mean, clothing stores have been around for ages. However, it was putting good-looking young men and ladies in front of a store that made the difference. And as you know, I've grown up in a restaurant, and I didn't even realize that my own father had a Blue Ocean Strategy. I mean, in hindsight, he created something which was actually an experience to the guests. Now, where the restaurant was located of my father, there were many similar restaurants. And of course, being in Belgium, we serve steak and fries. And this was the 60s. Now, the 60s was, of course, the moment where cycling was a very big thing in Belgium. And even people around the world probably know Eddy Merckx. He's like, you know, he's like one of the biggest ever. And my father actually created a steak, which was called the yellow jersey, which you get when you win the Tour de France. And that steak was exactly the same as any steak that anyone ordered. The only thing he did was he put on top of that steak something that, you know, made, what do you call it, made fireworks. And the strange thing was that everybody who saw the waiter coming out of the kitchen with that fireworks on wanted that steak to have that experience. And what my father did was he actually added to the price, but, you know, it was the same steak. So that was a blue ocean strategy as well. This is, for example, another one which turned up in London a few years ago. And I think that you can agree with me that in this time of history, it's actually a very strong blue ocean strategy, because you can sit there completely COVID proof. So that's the first advantage of why we should actually invest in customer experience. The second one is because it's the biggest engine in your organization. And you're probably thinking sales is, marketing is, because sales comes from marketing. Well, it's not, because customer experience is marketing. The way you pick up your phone, the way you welcome someone, the way you treat a complaint says much more than you investing in a brochure who looks absolutely amazing and has amazing copywriting. Every interaction with your guest, your client, or your customer, that is customer experience, and that is marketing. Now, be careful, because the opposite effect is also true. That means that you can ruin your company's reputation in less than 5 minutes if you handle it wrong. An example of that, and of course these days in social media it travels much faster, is this one, where a gentleman actually posted on Twitter, don't fly with British Airways, they can't keep track of your luggage. I mean, we've all been there, and mostly it's like a small issue and they handle it. But the reply to this gentleman from British Airways, well, have a look. It actually said that the Twitter feed is only open between the hours of 9 and 5 in the afternoon. So you can actually imagine that this story traveled the world, because of course there's not that much customer experience in that philosophy. The third advantage is actually that it is up to you to see the future of your industry. And this is, of course, one of the most difficult ones. And customer experience is actually very old. It's hundreds of years old, but still people are not seeing the future of the industry. An example is this one, the release of the first iPhone, where the CEO of Microsoft actually had big doubts about the iPhone because it didn't have a keyboard. Of course, in hindsight, we know better, but it's all about seeing through traditional things. I don't know if you know this, but for example, someone offered actually Netflix to Blockbusters, which was a video store in the time in the US, and they offered it to buy it for 50 million. And actually they refused to buy Netflix for 50 million. And of course, the rest is history. So it's up to you to see the future of your industry. Because if you look at it, the biggest thriving companies at the world, well, they don't actually have any product or service. Well, they do have a service, but hear me out. If you look, for example, at Facebook, Facebook does not create one part of their content. As you know, it's user-generated content. They don't own the content. Uber, the biggest taxi company in the world, does not own one car. And Airbnb, the biggest hotel chain in the world, if you will, doesn't own any beds or rooms. Why not? Because it is the experience that makes the difference. I mean, let's have a look, for example, at Uber. I know from experience, if I'm in the middle of London and I want a taxi, I need to go to one of the main roads. They won't drive to the small roads, except if they're dropping somebody off. Uber will come wherever I want. On top of that, when I order my Uber, I can actually punch in if I want the driver to have conversation with me, yes or no, the temperature in the car, etc., etc. So it's the experience that makes the difference. But what are the obstacles? What are the obstacles in not delivering customer experience? Well, let's have a look. First of all, it could be a difficult purchase process. I mean, you probably had it. You see something in your Facebook feed, you think, wow, that's a cool product, I'm gonna buy it. When you go to that website and it takes you like 90 seconds to figure out how to attach your credit card to the purchase, you give up. You simply give up. So that's the first thing that's possible. Of course, negative experience with customer service, that kind of speaks for itself. But waiting too long, especially in these days, is actually a no-go. And I'll show you that in a second as well, why that is. And of course, arrogant companies ignoring feedback, I mean, they're doomed. They're doomed actually, because what we did, of course, we send out a survey. We send out a survey to 6,000 people. Now, these are 40 clients to 150 companies. These 150 companies were anything from the bakery on the corner to a multinational. And we asked them 3 questions. And question number 1 was, when you go, I mean, when you do business with other businesses or you purchase something, now, what do you expect? What do you expect in terms of hospitality? Now, I'm going to show you the results. Have a look. And you won't be surprised, but this may be one thing that I want to emphasize. So our number 1, of course, is friendly host or hostess, sufficient parking, personal approach. So for example, using the client's name, clear signage, and the involvement of the host and the hostess or hostess. What we see here is that in the first 5 top results, there are 3 human aspects. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what makes the difference. Now, if you see, for example, at the very end, comfortable chairs, they don't care. Why not? Well, they don't want to wait. That's clear. Now, the second question we asked them is a very powerful one. And if you take one thing away from today, I hope it's this one. Because a lot of companies ask their clients, how can we improve our product or service? Now, that's a counterintuitive question to innovation, because the customers don't know what they need. You need to tell them. However, what you can ask them to kind of inspire you to innovation is, what bothers you? When you come to our company, when you purchase from us, when you have our service, what do you don't like about us? Have a look at the results. Unfriendliness, of course, the opposite. Being left on your own, unnecessary long waiting, and the host or hostess is too busy with other things. So once again, it's the human aspects. And the last question we asked was, when you go to this company, what is a minimum that you expect as a customer? What do you expect as a minimum to be treated like? And here's the results again. That you are announced immediately as a customer or a guest. That you get clear indications of where to go. We've all had this, where you ask directions to the bathroom and they kind of blow you off, saying to the left, to the right, instead of escorting you. That they tell you how long and where you have to wait. So once again, human aspects. But we all know this. We all know what the obstacles are. So why don't we do something about it? Why do we have teams in organizations who are not making eye contact, who are not friendly? Why is that? Well, there's a long explanation, and it's mostly to do with training. Training, and especially repetitive training. But now we're going to the heart of the presentation for today. Let me give you a number of tips. Tip number 1, the power of the yellow rose. The power of the yellow rose has to do with what we call loyalty. Now, look at this next slide. This is a percentage of ladies going to the same hairdresser. Now, as we all know, or probably what most of the ladies know, is when you go to your hairdresser, you stay very loyal. And as you can see from this slide, the older ladies get, the more loyal they are. So they're not going to switch as easy. What is the challenge for hairdressers these days is to attract new customers. Now, that means if that customer visits us for the first time, or they do business with you for the first time, that is your one and only window of opportunity to grab that client and to keep that client. Now, let me explain the tip of the yellow rose. A restaurant had a very smart idea of putting up the tables just before service, as they always do, and they put on the cutlery, etc., etc. And they dressed all of the tables with red roses. However, like 3 to 4 to 5 tables were dressed with yellow roses instead of red roses. And you probably had this before, but when you walk into a restaurant, sometimes you get the question, have you visited us before? Is this your first visit? And that is what that restaurant did as well. Whenever they got the answer, this is our first time, they would put them at a table with a yellow rose, not a red rose. That way, the whole team would know that we're first time customers. Not because of the fact that they would be treated better than a regular customer, but just to feel how the new customer would fit in and how they could approach that customer. Sometimes that needs to be gentle. Sometimes that needs to be very open, very closed from a distance. It depends on the type of customer, obviously. But that way they knew that those were the new customers. And that gave the whole team a sort of an adapted service, an adapted hospitality. I was very inspired by this story. And I had a client who actually owns 7 hairdressing salons. And he said, due to the fact that clients are so loyal, we have a difficulty of attracting not only first-time customers, but also by keeping them. So I told him the story of the yellow rose, and we applied it. How did we apply it? Well, as you know, this is what you get when you come into the hairdressing salon. He had black ones. All of them were black. And I said to him, why don't you purchase, let's say, 3 to 4 dark gray ones? Just a very subtle difference with the black ones. And every new customer that comes in, you don't give him an apron like this in black, but in dark gray. So that way, all of the hairdressers in the salon would know who the new customers would be and treat them accordingly. Because if you go to a new hairdresser, maybe you don't want to talk for an hour. Maybe you want to be left alone and just assess the business, if you know what I mean. So that is the power of the yellow rose. So what can you do, for example? Well, for example, one day I went to London to a very nice hotel, and they actually gave me a return card. And on that card, it said, welcome to the family. Use this code with your next visit. And that actually gave me a discount, and it also made me book much easier. You can also make him a member of something. I mean, I think that's what IAC is all about membership and having that feeling of, right, this is an organization I can trust and I'll keep coming back. Same thing here. And of course, look at your processes of making it easy for the customer. But I want to clarify something. I want to clarify something because the power of the yellow rose is actually an element in hospitality, which is very, very powerful. And it's called anticipation. Knowing what the guest wants before they know it themselves. I'll give you an example. Look at this. This is the Four Seasons Hotel in Los Angeles. It is the second best hotel in Los Angeles, according to thousands of users on TripAdvisor. Now, why am I mentioning the second best hotel? Because you're probably thinking the best hotel is something like, I don't know, Marriott, Hilton, etc. But it's not. The best hotel in LA out of 307, according to more than 1,500 users on TripAdvisor, is, well, let's say, not a fancy hotel. They call it the Magic Castle. The Magic Castle is actually the #1 hotel in LA. It's not looking fancy, is it? It's actually, it's looks like canaries are living there, if you know what I mean. But this is the pool. Now, if you are around the pool with your children, what are they going to ask you during the day? Can I have a soda? Can I have something to eat? They're probably going to ask you for ice cream. So the people from the Magic Castle said, why don't we anticipate this for the children? So what they did was they actually put up a phone at the height of the children so they could order only ice creams. And they call it the Popsicle Hotline. That, ladies and gentlemen, is called anticipation. And as you know, children are the customers of tomorrow. Right. On to tip number 2, artificial intelligence versus grandma. Now, I'm not going to give you my full opinion on artificial intelligence, but I think we're not there yet, if you know what I mean. Actually, it's still software being put into a system by humans and other humans using it. And it can go wrong. It can actually go wrong. Have a look at this one, where a bot, a chat bot would ask, was the order correct? And somebody said, yeah, but it was 2 hours late. And they actually had to repeat it 2 times before they said, why are you not listening to me? And of course, grandma would sit down with you with a cup of tea, listen to all of your stories, and react in a natural way. This is another fail that we had in AI, where Amazon created a system to recognize actually criminals, and they accidentally recognized lawmakers as criminals because the face recognition didn't work that well. So we're not there yet, if you know what I mean. But what about grandma? Why is grandma so hospitable? Well, it's all about personalization. It's all about the person. It's all about knowing what you want. Let me give you quickly a few numbers. 71% of people think it's frustrating that they are treated without a personal touch. They got the feeling that they're just a number, if you know what I mean. Even worse, 6 out of 10 will stop buying certain brands that have weak personalization techniques. And 72% say that they only react to personalized messages. That is, for example, something which is advised by MailChimp. So MailChimp, for example, they advise you to use the name of the customer, especially in email. You've got these integrating features in MailChimp. And actually, we've done a few tests, and we see that indeed personalization works and has a much bigger open rate. Another thing you can use, and this comes from my time in the Lanesborough Hotel, is guest history. Now, guest history is very simple. When the guests came into the Lanesborough Hotel and I was a junior butler, it was my responsibility to gather 4 pieces of guest history within the first 24 hours of these people's stay. So I went into the room when they weren't there, and I looked around the room. And I noticed, for example, that the lady was sleeping on the left, the gentleman was sleeping on the right. I saw, for example, that they only use still water and never sparkling water. And we would actually adapt our service to the guest history we gathered. Even stronger, when they came back, we would make preparations so that the lady sleeping at the left, that we would put for example, I don't know, tissue boxes, etc., for her, which she preferred, over there and not the right-hand side. And that's the same thing that your grandma did. She knew which cookies you liked. She knew what tea you liked to drink or what soda. So use guest history. It's so very, very powerful. I must say that in bigger organizations, it is a challenge logistically. I mean, probably a lot of you work with CRM, etc., but it is a logistical challenge. It's quite a bit of work, but it's absolutely stunning. Another one, don't ask questions you already know. That means if you meet somebody for the second time, at least have a look at their file. You should have file knowledge so that they actually feel, oh, they didn't forget about us. They did their homework, if you know what I mean. And of course, you got to know what they like, what they don't like as well. Why? Because knowing what people don't like work in 2 ways. First of all, you can avoid it. Second of all, you can use that pain as a marketing technique. Let me explain. You've got here 2 pills. The first pill on the left shows you how not to lose 10,000 euros. The one on the right will explain to you how to win 10,000 euros. Most people will choose the one on the left. Why? Well, because people will always try to avoid pain over pleasure. That's very strange. Let me put it this way. Let's say let's say you go onto an airplane and you've got your children with you, and the stewardess gives you a tip, and she says, for example, we suggest that you do this and that in order to avoid that your children would get hurt. Now, who wants their children to get hurt? No one. And that is why pain in communication is so very strong. Now, that is what I call grandma. On top of that, I've got a third tip for you. And this is one that we have presented for a very long time. Actually, there's one of my senior trainers in this call, and he mentions it to everyone as well. And it's what we call language. Now, I think that's the single thing that can make the difference. I mean, let's look at car brands, for example. Car brands, I mean, there are not that many bad cars anymore, but the way you communicate with your clients is what makes the difference. Now, in language, the problem is that we sometimes have a defensive ego. That means if something goes wrong, we actually put up our shields and we immediately go into defense. That's all through language. Because what you want to avoid is that you go into a negative spiral. For example, here in the Bottler School, and you can ask my students, it's not easy to do. We add words to their vocabulary, but we also take words away. For example, here in the school, the two expressions which cannot be used is, for example, no problem, and the expression okay. Try to scratch that from your vocabulary. I challenge you, you're not going to last an hour, especially not in normal conversation. You have to be highly trained and disciplined to avoid this. My students are here for 5 weeks. They're still going around saying no problem and okay. And I understand because, you know, we've been using it that long. And you might be asking, why wouldn't you ask that? Well, or why would you say that? Because when you say no problem, you're already giving away that it could have been a problem. And the word problem is something you don't want to hear. Actually, a true story is when I was young in the hotel of my parents, the people from the hotel came down, the guests in the hotel. And I said to one of the ladies, a very good morning. Did you sleep well? And actually, my mom took me aside and she said, never, ever ask that question again. I said, what do you mean? I said, that's what you ask in a hotel. She said, don't. Because many people that go to a hotel, especially the first night, you know, it's not their bed. The pillow might be too soft, too hard. You don't want to start the day with a negative feeling. So don't ask them that. And she was absolutely right. So for example, the language, no problem, is all about avoiding a negative spiral, if you know what I mean. For example, what we also do here in the school is we avoid certain neuro associations. So for example, the word price is something which you will not find on our website. We avoid the word price because it kind of gives you the feeling, oh, this guy wants to sell me something. The word cost is something we avoid as well. And for example, the word agreement is what we use for contract, because the word contract kind of gives you the feeling of, oh, here we go for the next 5 years. I'm tied to this contract. Whereas an agreement is a win-win situation. However, at the end of the day, the words are the same, but it gives a different feeling to your customer. And that's what we're completely after. Now, of course, body language is important as well. So body language, not only verbal language, but body language is, of course, very, very important. Now, a small word on body language. I don't know if you know this, but it exists in 3 parts. Only 7% of our body language communication are the physical words. What is much more important is the tone of voice, the way you talk to your customers, where you emphasize certain words, and even, as I just did, put pauses and stretch certain words. For example, one word with the right tone of voice or the wrong one could completely change the situation. And I know this from personal experience. For example, if my wife says, Vincent, I know I have to do something, if you know what I mean. But if she says, Vincent, I know it's going to cost me a lot of money. So the tone of voice can completely change the way that your client, customer, guest will feel when they're talking to you. And of course, the most important thing is your physiology. That means body posture, facial expressions, etc. For example, you're in a meeting. Let's say you're in a meeting, and this is the situation. So the letter A is your client. The letter B is you. Now, the situation you see on the screen is actually what we call the hostile position. You're actually face to face with the customer. That means this is, for example, when lawyers sit across from each other and they have like a strong debate. However, if you would be sitting there, you're actually in the cooperative position. Now, it can be a bit condescending because if you're sitting there, it's like sitting next to a child when you help with their homework, if you know what I mean. However, if you sit here, you got the best of both worlds. And on top of that, if you are talking to multiple people, the tip I'm going to give you is always turn your full body to the person you're talking to. Because let's say I sit like this and I'm talking to somebody and I just turn my head to the other person, I'm not giving my full attention. Turn your full body to that person and give them your full attention. It might seem a bit strange at the beginning, but it is very, very good body language. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that were a number of my tips. And it all comes down to, of course, delivering a great customer experience. But what is customer service? Well, if you look at the very essence of customer service, it's actually something you do for someone in the very essence of things. So if I ask, for example, could you get me a coffee? And you walk to the kitchen, you get me a coffee, you put in front of me, you're not that happy and you just throw the cup on the table, you actually did me a service. You actually did something for me. But I think you can agree that the feeling I have is not a great one. And that is where the difference between service and hospitality comes in. Because service is something you do for someone, but hospitality is how you make someone feel. And you know what, ladies and gentlemen? In these days of social media, in these days of Instagram and selfies, it's still very hard to make a selfie of what we call an emotion. Now, on top of that, hold on. I'm just reading the chat, just a second. So what Peter is saying, let's focus less on spoiling the meeting planner, contract signer, or CEO only. Let's focus more on providing a great experience to all meeting participants. Give unexpected peak moments to the entire group, which they will always remember. I mean, Peter is obviously absolutely right. Because if you look, for example, in your business, in terms of events, there are a number of groups which are obviously, well, let's say, forgotten from time to time. So it is indeed your responsibility to create peak moments, because Thomas Cox, who used to be the general manager to Claridge's Hotel, he actually moved on to the Corinthia Hotel in London now. He stated very well in the documentary one time. He said, you have to give your hotel guest just one reason, just one memory to come back the next time. And that is what hospitality is all about. So ladies and gentlemen, those were my tips for you. I hope that you took something away from this, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Vincent, thank you very much for sharing those tips. I've got quite a few notes that I've taken there, and whilst we get some questions that come into our Q&A here, just a couple that I've got. One was, as you were talking about engagement, I know you talked about the voice being one of the more powerful ways as opposed to maybe body language, but of course we're coming back into socially distanced environments in in meeting environments and conferences and meetings. Do you see that as even more reason why we perhaps have to go even further with the use of voice and tone, because we maybe haven't got, you know, the touch points that we had before, or the ways that we used to, you know, get close to the person we were talking to before?
Absolutely. I mean, if we look, for example, talking about face masks, for example, I think that we all in the last few months had to ask somebody to repeat something because, of course, your voice is muffled. So first of all, you need a stronger voice. You need kind of a more powerful voice. That's the first thing. Then what you just said in going further, and this is what we actually advise to our Butler students here, is when you wear the mask, actually your smiling has to be kind of exaggerated. They won't see it, but when you exaggerate your smile, you're going to see it in the corners of your eyes. And that is actually going to show that you're smiling to the person, even when you're wearing a face mask. However, it's my calculated guess, whenever we get through this pandemic, that it will come back. I mean, I don't think that habits we have learned over centuries and centuries will go away with a 2-year pandemic. I think it's going to all come back. We're going to be more conscious about it. And if you look at the future 30 years from now, people, I mean, like children being 5 now and 35 and 30 years, I think they're going to go back to what we have always known. But yes, it is something to consider, and it's something to be attentive for. Absolutely.
Great, that's good advice, because we are yet, in many of the environments, we're yet to experience what that looks and feels like within our venues. And so we need to prepare for that. It was nice to see as well in that wonderful lineup of brands, one of the brands that we know very well in this industry, apart from Wyndham Hotels, but also Sodexo, when you're working with those other brands as well. So I know you're very active in and outside of our industry sector as well. So really appreciate that. My last question is one, when you told me that you had students that have joined you from you know, all parts of the world today, but more importantly in your classes. Vincent, when you're training these principles of you know, rich hospitality and engagement, what, if any, cultural differences do you have to prepare individuals for? Or is it a standard that should be applicable to wherever you go and deliver exceptional customer service?
You're absolutely right. I mean, for example, it goes 2 ways. First of all, we've got students coming here from all around the world, and we have sometimes to appreciate their difference in culture. For example, as you know, people from the US, they have a different style of dining etiquette. Of course, Asia has a different style of dining etiquette. So first of all, we have to respect that towards our students. Second, we never know where the students are going to end up. So for example, if you have a European student going to the US, or a US student going to the Middle East, you've got cultures all over the place. So what we do actually is we try to integrate as much cultures as possible, but it's virtually impossible to cover all of them. But we especially touch on the very, what do you call it, like sensitive things. I'll give you an example. A while ago, we had a Mexican student, and I don't know if you know this, but Mexican people, they don't like to be physically touched. Now, one of our instructors actually, he wanted to compliment the student on a job well done and give him literally a pat on the back. And that was not very welcome. And I mean, we're not perfect as well, and we had to learn that along the way as well. So, for example, wherever I go around the world, the first thing I do is I always adapt to the culture. If they ask me what I want to eat, I'm going to ask, do you have anything local? And I'm going to ask them, how do you eat this? If I don't know, and that's perfectly fine. So I would really advise anyone, be respectful of the culture you're going to, but don't lose your own identity.
Great, thank you. Because of course we're working in an environment with business meetings where our audiences are really diverse culturally and geographically. We literally do not know, cannot assume that a Dutch group in a Dutch venue is bringing Dutch attendees. It can be, you know, from all around the world. So thank you for that. Another question that's come in, could you share any tips on etiquettes for Zoom calls and hybrid meetings? I'm surprised that didn't come up earlier, to be honest with you. As a presenter, speaker, you know, how does it translate? I noticed you started your presentation, camera off and music. That was for a reason, right? So that may play into your answer a little, I guess.
Absolutely. Now, we talked about customer experience today, so I just didn't want to appear on camera and said hello. So I wanted to start off with an experience, if you know what I mean. Now, the choice of music might not have been everybody's taste, but I hope they liked it anyway. And you actually start with a feeling. I mean, we showed a slideshow of pictures of what we've done so far. And, you know, I wanted to start with an experience. So that's the first thing. The second thing for Zoom calls, what we realized is, in terms of etiquette, is of course, well, I would say for the participants is to, for example, mute it, etc., and just be respectful for the presenter. But on the side of the presenter, I think it's a lot technical. For example, I got a light on me at the moment because I really wanted you to see my face and see my visual expressions. On top of that, I invested in an HD camera. I invested in a headset because I hope that audio is therefore much better and avoids echoes. Because what we've seen is that people would kind of forgive you for a bit of, you know, bad video, but they don't forgive you for bad audio. So that would be my number one tip. Invest in really good audio. You got a lot of, you know, decent priced solutions these days. And on top of that, of course, it's like in any meeting, you know, you let people talk and you give them your time and you try to make eye contact as much as you can, even if it's the camera. I got 2 screens at the moment, and sometimes I look at that one, but I wouldn't do it. You know, the majority of my view would be towards the camera. So that would be my direct tips.
Well, you've been really engaging with us in the last hour, Vincent. So thank you very much for that. We really,
my pleasure. My pleasure.
A treat to introduce you to the IAC family around the world, and I hope you can make it to one of our live events in the future, as we're all really keen to get back around the physical table. So, you know, on that note, I'll thank everybody for joining us for today's webinar. The recording will be shared by Kate after the event. I wonder if you have, you're sharing your details, that's great, so that you can take a look at the training classes that you've got at the hospitality school. But wish you all a superb end to your Thursdays, and see you all again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.
At a club outside of town, I was so surprised. I was